All right, welcome to our weekly live. Tonight we're going to be debunking some myths about properties in Northern Michigan. I hear a lot of these all the time, and I thought it is time to do an updated version of Mythbusters, try to tell you some of the false information I hear about Northern Michigan, and hopefully add a little bit of value to your life. My name is Gino D'Angelo. I'm a local Northern Michigan real estate agent, and I come to you live typically every Thursday, but I've got a charity event tomorrow, so I came on. I didn't want to miss this week, so I'm coming to you live Wednesday. When I decided to do this, I didn't realize it was also the Pistons opening night. So I'm going to finish this at about 8 o'clock, maybe a little bit sooner. The Pistons start at 8, so I won't interrupt with that. What a great time to be a sports fan in Northern Michigan, or Michigan in general. The Tigers had a pretty good run. The Lions are good. Red Wings are the Red Wings, and I think the Pistons are going to be pretty good this year. So it's definitely an exciting. I think living in Northern Michigan, we talk a lot about living in Northern Michigan on this channel, and I think it's a little bit better living in Northern Michigan when the sports teams are doing well. So as always, drop a comment whether you're watching live or the replay. Let me know where you're watching from. I ask this every week, and every week I'm surprised at where we're reaching people, and I just think that's incredible. I've met a lot of you through this channel, through these videos, and I'm eternally grateful for what this channel has done for exposing Northern Michigan, for connecting me with you. And this is my favorite hour of the week. I'll just say that. So again, drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. This is live. It's meant to be interactive. Every Sunday at 1 o'clock, we release a new video. And then typically Thursday, but this week, Wednesday, I come to you live to answer your questions about Northern Michigan. We're going to talk about some myths. But if there's something on your mind, if there's something you're curious about, building costs, development, the future of Northern Michigan, interest rates, we can talk about it all. I'm pretty well dialed into the Northern Michigan real estate market, and I can help you with any questions you might have. Oscar Crocker, Battleground, Washington. Thank you so much, Oscar, for watching. Yeah, keep them coming. Let me know where you're watching from. Comments, questions, anything I can do to help you. We're going to talk about myths. If you've got some of your own favorite real estate myths, drop them in the chat. We can talk about them. Mary Riddy, Battle Creek, like the 35 other times I've watched the Gino D'Angelo live. Mary, I appreciate you continuing to watch. And hey, every week, drop where you're from, even if this is the 36th time. Battle Creek. If you're watching this, you're not familiar with Michigan, Battle Creek is where Kellogg's cereal is. That's sort of their claim to fame. Mary, if I'm missing anything else, let me know. But Battle Creek is definitely an iconic town in Michigan. So thank you so much for watching. Again, drop where you're watching from. Let me know any questions you might have. What are some real estate myths you've heard? Whether it's Northern Michigan, whether it's Michigan, whether it's somewhere else. What is a real estate myth that you want to talk about? Because I think we have a lot of fun with these, and I'm excited to get into this one tonight. As always, I put the ticker up. We are really close to getting to a new milestone with subscribers. If you're watching this and you're not yet subscribed, it would mean the world to me and my team if you were to do so. I often say this: you guys only see me on camera, but there is a large team behind what we do with YouTube, and they watch the stats even closer than I do. And I feel a personal responsibility to their happiness by encouraging you to subscribe to the channel, because if you don't subscribe, they blame it on me, and I don't want that to happen. So if you're not yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. If there's anybody you think might find value in what we're doing, share this with them. Let them know about us. We're doing a lot on YouTube, Instagram, Gino D'Angelo Realtor on Instagram. We're just trying to show as much about what it's actually like to live in Northern Michigan as possible. And look, I get a lot of this. I was at my son's football game, and somebody came up to me and they said, "I love your channel. The thing I like the most is you don't sugarcoat it. You tell exactly how it is." And I think that's why we've had so much success with what we're doing, is we're honest. We talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Look, I always use this as an example. You're going to learn one way or another that we get a ton of snow here in the wintertime. So I would rather tell you that and be honest than try to hide that from you. And then you move here and you're like, what the heck? We get a ton of snow in the winter. So whether it's Northern Michigan, whether it's someplace else, I know I've got so many people that reach out to me that are considering, I've got one person that reached out recently that's considering Northern Michigan, Colorado, and Maine. So obviously, I'm trying to be the mayor of Northern Michigan to convince them that they'd be happier here, but it's totally up to them. And Northern Michigan is definitely in the spotlight right now. And again, super excited to be here with you tonight. So let's talk about some real estate myths. What's actually true, what's actually not true. Myth number one, I just heard this week. You cannot buy a home in Northern Michigan for under $300,000 anymore. And first of all, that's true. That's not true. That's false. we've got a couple deals under contract right now that are well under $300,000, and we've sold a number of homes over the last couple of years, even with property values at their highest. Now, can you be in Traverse City or Petoskey for $300,000? Yes, a little bit trickier, but there are plenty of areas around northern Michigan that you can still find quote unquote affordable living. And I know that's a hot button topic, and every time I talk about affordable, people come at me in the comments. So let's try not to do that. Affordable living based on the day and age we live in now. And look, I remember when, and this wasn't that long ago, we're selling a $250,000 house, was selling a big house. That was an expensive listing. And, due to COVID and interest rates being lower, causing prices to go up, that's certainly, now 250 sort of on like the very, the entry level of northern Michigan, which is fine. And we often have the conversation, was northern Michigan underpriced? Is northern Michigan overpriced now, or was it underpriced before COVID? So drop a comment, let me know. Is northern Michigan, and be honest, is northern Michigan overpriced today, or was it just underpriced before? And I'm obviously biased because I'm the biggest northern Michigan fan you're going to find, and I love it here. I think it's one of the best places in the world to live if you can make it work for you. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight. But I think a lot of people just didn't know about northern Michigan. It was sort of a hidden secret. And it used to be a lot harder to get to. I remember 10, 15 years ago, I've been selling real estate for 22 years, those of you that don't know me. And even, 10, 15 years ago, we really drew people from the Midwest, places like Chicago, Cincinnati, a lot of Indiana, Ohio, Illinois. You get the snowbird from Florida, but now we're drawing people. Look, we've got somebody watching from Battleground, Washington. And I don't, I would assume if they're watching, they're at least mildly interested in northern Michigan. And that just wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago. We were really pulling from a smaller area. And now, not only are we pulling from all over the country, but all over the world. I've sold people houses that have come here from Germany. And it's just really interesting, especially since this isn't a transient area. This isn't an area where we've got a bunch of big employers that are moving people in and out, which you see in some other areas. This is an area that people want to be in. They love to be in. And now due to remote work, they can sort of afford to be here because one of the things we talk about in northern Michigan a lot is it's sad that it's hard to work in northern Michigan and afford to live in northern Michigan. And I think that's a little bit of an issue you see with a lot of resort towns. Northern Michigan isn't unique in that. And I've talked to some people that are in resort markets that have the same exact problem. Places like Jackson Hole and some other high-end resort areas sort of cause the same problem. So any place outside of Petoskey, Traverse City, you should easily be able to find a house $300,000 or under if that's what you're looking for. And look, northern Michigan has every price range as long as you're realistic with what you get for the money. And that's something we can certainly help you with. You can find something for everybody here. One of my favorite sales from last year was a kid that I helped buy his first home just down the road from a house I own over on the east side of the state. He paid $170,000. Recently he invited me to his birthday party, and he loves it. And it's a cool little house. It's in the woods. He loves it. It's on a dirt road. It's, not in the most premier location to get to everything northern Michigan has to offer, but it's $170,000. It was this kid's first home, and he is extremely excited. So that's what it's all about. So yeah, if you're thinking about northern Michigan, if you want to buy a $10 million house, we've got those. If you want to buy a $150,000 house, we've got those, and certainly everywhere in between. Some of my tips I always like to give people, if you're watching this or you're coming to northern Michigan, you want to get the most bang for your buck, the further away you can get from Petoskey and Traverse City, 10 minutes out away from the center of those cities, you're going to save a little bit, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You start to get 25, 30 minutes away from the big city, or the big cities, the big towns here, and you really get a lot of bang for your buck. I'm showing a house over in Grawn tomorrow, which is a little town located south of Traverse City, and there are a ton of people that live in Grawn that work in Traverse City. It's a short, easy drive into town on 37. You've got the Pit Spitters right there. You're close to the mall. Chum's Corner, which is a popular corner of anybody that knows Traverse City. Mary said, I'd love to see a video specifically on the fun festivals in your area that take place all year round. You have the best videographer. I think those happenings add to the appeal of there. Absolutely, Mary. We're going to do that for you. Unfortunately, so Mary brought up a good topic. We missed the window. We do have a ton of footage of festivals and stuff like that happen throughout the year. But obviously, it is the end of October. That season has passed. we'll do a better job of grabbing those next year. One thing that I'm really, really excited about, and I wish I would have done this last year, but as life goes, sometimes you just need ideas to develop over time, and that's sort of what happened. We're going to do a ton of content, lives, our weekly videos, some Instagram stuff, some email marketing about winter in Northern Michigan. My team and I met recently, and we've come up with a plan where we're going to compartmentalize Northern Michigan. We're going to treat Northern Michigan winter like its own thing and just do a ton of videos about it. Because selfishly, I'm a little bit slower in the wintertime, so I have two things. Selfishly, I'm slower in the wintertime, so I have more time that I can dedicate to going super deep on the content. Not selfishly, and this is for your benefit, I still believe, we talk about it all the time, and it comes up in conversations every time I get a new buyer relocating to Northern Michigan that's going to live here full time, is the winters. And I want to shed as much light around winter this year as possible. I don't know what kind of winter we're going to have. I don't know if we're going to have a ton of snow, no snow. Maybe we'll have another ice storm. I certainly hope not, but you never know. So if you're interested in Northern Michigan winter, stay tuned, because there's a little bit of a lull. We get the way the content cycle works. I'll give you a little bit behind the scenes of how we do things. Spring, we start getting ready for summer. Summer, we're super busy. We try to get as much content, B-roll, footage, record what it's like to live in Northern Michigan. And then the fall comes. We've put a ton of fall content out. Again, if you follow me on Instagram, you've seen that. We've got some stuff coming up for the channel. And then there's a little bit of a lull between like Halloween until it snows and we get into the holidays. Certainly the holidays, typically there's snow around that time. So we're definitely going to go all in on that this year. And I'm super excited for it. I'm curious to see if you guys think it's worthwhile or what you think about our winter content. So Mary also said farmers markets are fantastic too. Absolutely. And every town has one, it seems like. Petoskey's is great. It's 1 block from my office. It shuts the whole street down on Friday, which is cool. It's actually directly across the street from where my son used to go to school. So that is definitely, the farmers markets are definitely a huge part of living in Northern Michigan. So yeah, I've told you a couple stories about what it's like to live here. Certainly can find a house, 300,000, 250,000. I'm working with buyers right now, and I think that's probably part of the appeal of, part of the results of this channel is I've got buyers looking for $5 million houses, and I've got buyers looking for $250,000 houses, and we help them equally. And we've been able to help a lot of you buy houses in Northern Michigan this year, which again, I'm grateful for. So no matter your budget, I'm certain we can help you. Another myth I heard just this week, speaking of more expensive homes, is waterfront homes sell quickly. And while that can be the case, you do see a lot of the premier, Walloon Lake, Bay Harbor, on the water in Harbor Springs. That stuff tends to sell pretty quickly, mainly because there's not a lot of it and there's a ton of demand. And typically that demand comes with buyers who have a little bit bigger of a budget and would rather get a home than worry about paying, getting a bargain on a home. So that is definitely something to consider. But we're seeing houses right now on Burt Lake, Mullet Lake, some on Lake Charlevoix that are lingering a little bit. And it seems like Northern Michigan's biggest thing right now is just trying to find the equilibrium from a pricing standpoint. And we are seeing prices come down here a little bit. A couple of years ago, it was in a lot of markets, it was just finding a house. And we were doing not crazy things, but we were sending letters out. We were knocking on doors. We were calling for sale by owners, old expired listings. We were just trying to find inventory for people. In fast forward to 2 years, now the listings are starting to stack up a little bit. And you as a buyer has a lot more leverage than you once did, because if you're looking for a $500,000 house, 5 minutes from Petoskey schools, 2 years ago, there may have been 1 or 0. Now there's a handful, and you can be a little more picky. And once they've been sitting on the market for a little bit, you can typically get a pretty good deal. But back to waterfront, specifically this time of year, there's, again, the lull for the content that I was just talking about almost mimics the lull for waterfront buyers. Right now, you're still seeing waterfront homes sell, but it's kind of that weird gap where if you buy a waterfront home, you close rig right now, you're probably not going to use it again until the spring. A lot of times buyers want to use that time to make sure, to update the house, to get any improvements they want to do, to buy furniture, to get ready for the season. And it's still a little bit early for people to be worried about that. Now it's still happening, but we really see once we get past the holidays, you get to that January, February spot, you start to see a lot of waterfront buyers come out of the woodwork because they are ready to get that house and get it ready for them and themselves and their families to be able to enjoy it for Memorial Day weekend, which is obviously a very big weekend in Northern Michigan. So Depending on the house, if it's priced on the water, if it's priced well, it's got a good layout. The waterfront's nice, the land's nice, the lot's nice. Those typically sell quickly. But if it's a little bit off or it's a little bit overpriced, those do tend to lag on the market. So also when you're buying waterfront homes in Northern Michigan and you're thinking about it from a budgeting standpoint, there's a lot of aspects to take into consideration. You're gonna have to buy the house. You're gonna maybe have to buy a dock, or maybe it comes with a dock. Maybe you're gonna have to buy a special dock because then you have to go buy a boat and jet skis, and it definitely starts to add up. So if you're thinking about buying a waterfront home in Northern Michigan, reach out to us. We can certainly guide you through that. Along the same lines, myth number 3 is winter is a dead selling season. And once upon a time, that was more true than it is today, meaning I remember when there used to be real seasonality in the real estate market in Northern Michigan. And over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe 10 years, it seems like the market has sort of evened itself out, meaning we're not as busy in the winter, but we're still busy. One time I did a search or a study at a client who asked me this, and it's something like sales slow down. There's like 20% more sales. If you look at the busiest selling month of the year in Northern Michigan and the worst, the margin was only like 20%, meaning it's not 80%. It's not this drastic fall off. It's sort of a slight fall off. And that has to do with, not having a ton of inventory here. And as it trickles out, it just sort of getting eaten up a little bit. One thing that I like about the winter selling season from a buyer standpoint and a seller standpoint, now, I know most of you watching are typically most typically buyers. So from a buyer's perspective, it kind of goes both ways, but I'll talk about the buyer's perspective first. From the buyer's perspective, I like buying in the winter because if that seller is keeping their house on the market through the winter, they're motivated. Also, there tends to be a lot fewer buyers that you're competing with in the wintertime versus the spring when every buyer comes out of the woodwork. If you're looking, around the holidays, January, February, when there's 2 feet of snow on the ground in Northern Michigan, there's a chance early bird gets the worm, and there's a chance that you're going to have a lot less competition for those houses. So it's kind of a perfect storm. There's less competition. The people who leave their houses on the winter tend to be more motivated than those that take it off for the winter. And if you mix those two things together, you should be able to get yourself a fabulous deal. From the seller side, if any of you watching this are local or you're thinking about selling your house someplace else, this is valuable information. It kind of goes the same for sellers. It's a weird situation where it works both for buyers and sellers. For sellers, you should leave your house on the market because there are fewer homes to compete with. A lot of people, specifically in Northern Michigan, take their homes off the market during the winter months. And believe it or not, there are still people that life happens. Maybe they're coming to work at the hospital. Maybe they're relocating, or maybe they're, just got a bunch of money or just got a windfall. They're going to buy a house in Northern Michigan. When there's less competition, the buyers that are looking in the winter are also serious buyers because, a lot of people like to look at houses in Northern Michigan, specifically in July. You always get the people that come up here that want to see houses July 4th week because they're in the Northern Michigan. Either they're feeling the vibe of it and now they decide they want to live here and they look at houses for a week and then you never hear from them again. That is not going to happen in February. Nobody comes to Northern Michigan to look at houses in February that isn't serious about buying a house in Northern Michigan. So the big takeaway from those two is the winter selling season is great because both buyers and sellers who are actively trying to either buy or sell in the wintertime are typically more serious because there's a little bit of friction. There's a little bit of resistance of buying and selling real estate in February when you're talking about, having to wear boots and not being able to really see the lot and that sort of thing. So definitely something to keep into consideration. Also, a tip you might not know about buying a house. I say this about the spring too. The fall, winter, and spring, when the weather's a little bit more inclement, I think is a good time to look at a house because you can see things like draining. You can stand in a house in the wintertime and look and see, is the thermostat at 70 and it's still cold because the insulation is shot or lacking? You can tell a lot about a house and even a lot about an area. If you come to Northern Michigan in July, it's very easy for me to sell you a house. If you have the ability, the desire to buy a house, if you come here in July, we're probably going to find you a house. If you come here in February or January or March specifically, you're going to get to see the area when it's not at its best. And again, specifically if you're looking for something year round, I think it makes a lot of sense to come in the off season. And I'm working with a bunch of buyers right now, which makes me happy because they're getting to see Northern Michigan at its worst. The leaves are off the trees right now. It's not as pretty as it usually is year round. And if you're here now and you still think Northern Michigan is for you, then it probably is for you. So definitely something to consider. Myth number 4, this came up this week. Also, short-term rentals are banned everywhere, and that's not the case. I would say short-term rentals are, it's funny because short-term rentals 2 years ago probably weren't at the top of this list for something we want to talk about, because it seemed like every other call for a buyer was somebody that wanted to buy a house and rent it out short term. And it feels like, now correct me if I'm wrong, drop a comment if you feel differently or you're paying attention to the short-term rental market in Northern Michigan. It feels like the market took care of that, meaning forever, specifically around COVID, everybody bought these houses because they were on sale and short-term rented them, and it absolutely flooded the market. Now mix that with a little bit of a softening in demand, and we're seeing a lot of those short-term rentals come back on the market as active listings. So it feels like, the short-term rentals took a lot of our inventory or gobbled up a lot of our inventory, but now it does seem like it's giving some of that inventory back. But places like Traverse City have been really hard on short-term rentals. Petoskey and the city limits hard on short-term rentals. There's some HOAs. I heard a rumor that Birchwood up in Harbor Springs, which is a major development, this is just a rumor, so don't tell anybody, is they're going to ban short-term rentals, or they're working on banning short-term rentals, which I'm genuinely curious what the fallout from that is, because there's just so many of them up there. So definitely something to consider. Charlevoix has a license. There's a little bit of a wait list, but I've heard of people getting through that wait list pretty quickly. But again, there's some townships like Pleasant View. For now, they're friendly. Most places that are outside of city limits. Now, if you're not in city limits and you're not an HOA in Northern Michigan, you're probably safe to short-term rent your house. Now, we've had a short-term rental management company forever. It's not something we push. It's something we more do for our private clients. But I'm saying that to tell you we're pretty dialed into that sector of the market. So if you just want to have a conversation, I do think, unless there's an extenuating circumstance or you plan to use it heavily, I think it's very hard to buy a short-term rental in a lot of areas right now and have the numbers make sense, which is a practice we were going down a lot with a lot of people. So unless you're planning to use it heavily and rent it out sparingly and just are hoping to offset some of the costs of owning the house, I think short-term rentals the math of them just don't quite make sense the way they once did. So another myth is, while I think Northern Michigan is great for retirees, it's not only for retirees. Now, look, Northern Michigan, since the beginning of time, has been a haven for people that want to retire. We've got great healthcare, great community. There's a lot of social things to do here. It's an area, if you want to retire and live an active lifestyle, Northern Michigan is 100% for you. However, it is not just for retirees. No, look, I always say I'm going to tell the truth on this channel, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the good, you can call it good or bad or ugly, however you want to put it. I think it's a great thing. The average age in Northern Michigan is going up, which is because there are more people retiring here than moving here for families or moving here to buy their first home. So definitely Northern Michigan is a great spot for retirees. But also there are a ton of people, my son has been in the Petoskey school system his whole life, and there are tons of families with kids here. So there's plenty of that. But look, there's always, when you have resort areas, it's always going to be a little bit more of, you always have a little bit more of a higher retiree population, which, look, I think that this area is great for retirees. Those people, if you worked your whole life and you can retire anywhere, and if you're choosing Northern Michigan, there's probably a reason to do so. But we are seeing a demographic switch, specifically because there's a lot more remote workers. The reason that I think Northern Michigan became or has been such a heavily populated area for retirees is the only people that can afford to live here are retirees. So now that with remote work and some other things, we're starting to see a little bit more of that. So retirees are definitely being still a strong part of the population, but are definitely, we're seeing a lot more remote workers in that sort of thing. This is a funny one. I think the person that said this to me was kind of joking, but they said every home up north is a log cabin or a cottage, and that's not the truth. There's plenty of houses and subdivisions here. If you look at the Gaslight District, they've got Victorian homes. You go over to Harbor Springs, they've got Victorian homes. We're starting to see a lot of modern homes. There's just a house being built, just put on the market today in the Charlevoix Country Club. Extremely modern, beautiful home, $2 million. It's a house that I didn't think you'd see in Northern Michigan, but now it's here. I think it looks great. And as we are seeing more people live here full time, Northern Michigan is definitely not just log cabins, although we have a lot of log cabins, we have a lot of cottages, but we have a lot of also very nice year-round houses as well. Myth number 7 is local realtors don't use technology. And I don't know about the rest of realtors in Northern Michigan, but we use a ton of technology, which is why I'm streaming from my laptop with my digital camera and my microphone with my lights all over the place, and AI probably transcribing what I'm talking about. So Northern Michigan, look, it's a little bit slower here, a little bit more behind the times. There might be, this might be an area where the top realtors aren't on Instagram or on Facebook, but we're definitely not as technologically behind the times as some might think we are. Myth number 8 is it's too late to buy in Northern Michigan. I do think it's too late. It's not too late to buy in Northern Michigan with a caveat. The caveat being that Mary just said something. Oh yeah, mushroom houses. Absolutely. We got mushroom houses here as well. It's not too late to buy in Northern Michigan. It's more expensive to buy in Northern Michigan than it once was. I'm never, ever going to dispel that because that is 100% the truth. And all that seems to have really done is just attract a different clientele of people here, in the sense of I still have conversations. I just sold a house a week ago in Traverse City for a little under $2 million. And those people sold their over $3 million house to buy here, and they still felt that Northern Michigan was a value compared to where they left in Colorado. So I still have, I can't tell you how often I always call it the tale of two markets, and it's incredible how often I have this conversation, but one conversation and one phone call that somebody's complaining about how expensive Northern Michigan has gotten. And I swear sometimes the very next phone call, I'll have somebody talking about how much of a bargain Northern Michigan is compared to where they're coming from. And I think that's just really created an interesting dynamic. So it is definitely not too late to buy in Northern Michigan. It is too late to buy in Northern Michigan. It is too late to buy in downtown Petoskey on Mitchell for $250,000. It is, those days are behind us. Will the market crash and those things come back and prices drop? I don't think so, but it's not too late to buy Northern Michigan. Look, in Northern Michigan, it feels like, I don't know how to say this eloquently, so I'll just do my best. Whether we like it or not, it just seems like everything in the world is getting too expensive. I saw this on Instagram or someplace that said going to the grocery store feels like shopping at the airport because of the prices. And I thought that was really funny because it's not that far away from being the truth. Everything is just expensive. I wish it weren't the case. Sometimes I wish prices were a lot less here, but when you start to talk about, this is just more of a societal thing. When you're talking about an area that's got a ton of fresh water, that's got mild climate, that's safe, has great schools, great healthcare. Look, if you've been to Northern Michigan and you've seen Little Traverse Bay, I can't tell you how often I'm driving. And there's a couple of roads. There's a road called Cemetery Road. It's in Resort Township, and you go down this hill, and it's almost like you have a tunnel down the hill, and all you see is the water, like a painting. And I thought to myself, why did we ever think that this was going to be affordable forever? And as somebody that's lived in Northern Michigan their whole life, I find myself having conversations, and I'll hear my voice in my head say, why did I think that this was going to stay affordable forever? When you've got Little Traverse Bay with the $1 million sunsets, you've got ski hills 10 minutes away, you've got great schools, you've got vineyards, you've got wineries, you've got great downtowns. Why did I ever think this was going to be affordable forever? And it just seems like with the way the internet is, and, a lot of people blame us for the videos we put out, attracting people in Northern Michigan, which I think is sort of funny because I wish I had that power. It's just changed, and I think it's going to be this way. So if you can make Northern Michigan make sense for you and your family financially, it is still the best place in the world to live, in my opinion. It's just gotten a little more expensive, and that's sort of what happens. I remember when Cadillac Escalades were $50,000 and now they're $150,000. And whether we like it or not, or whether we can justify it, or whether we know the reason, it's just sort of how it is. Another myth I heard, and this is a good one. This probably should have been the one I led with. Property taxes are the same everywhere. And one I often hear is houses on the water have higher taxes than houses off the water. So that should be a myth in itself. Maybe I wrote that down. Nope, I did not write that down. So this is a 2-for-1. If you're in Resort Township and you've got a house with an SEV of $500,000, meaning the house is worth $1 million, and it's on the water or off the water, those taxes are going to be the same. Now, typically waterfront taxes are higher because the houses on the water are worth more, causing the prices to go up. So in northern Michigan, it's the SEV, which is half of the state equalized value, which is half of the, quote unquote market value multiplied by the millage rate. So one of the first things we do, and if you look, I'll give you a free resource. It's if you Google state of Michigan property tax estimator. If you know enough about what you're looking at, you can estimate taxes for everything, and it'll show you the homestead and the non-homestead. The non-homestead is going to be 18 mils higher because that's what pays for the schools. So property taxes in downtown Traverse City or downtown Petoskey are going to be way more from a millage standpoint than houses in Alanson. Well, in town, Alanson's expensive, but Afton or Sheboygan, Gaylord, some of those townships out there that have a lot less services. So property taxes are a big deal. Make sure when you're looking at houses, you ask your agent to estimate what the property taxes are going to be. One thing that's really interesting about property taxes in northern Michigan, maybe it's like this in other places, but I'm only familiar with northern Michigan. You don't really know what the taxes are going to be. So you can go on to the county websites and see what the current owner is paying. Now, what happens in Michigan when you sell a property is what happens is it's what's called the property becomes uncapped. The value becomes uncapped. And typically it can shoot all the way up to what the new sale price is. Now, typically that doesn't happen. We usually see it land somewhere around 60 or 70% of the new value. So you still aren't paying as much as you technically should be, but that is definitely, so it's hard for us because, taxes outside of your mortgage are one of the biggest expenses of owning a home. And as they should be, one of the first questions we get from a lot of buyers is, what are the taxes going to be? What can they go up to? And I say, here's what they are now. Here's what they could be. It's somewhere between those two. And, you're going to have to make your decision based on that. So that's definitely something to think about. Something else to consider is if you're getting a mortgage, we've had this happen a couple of times, make sure your lender is putting enough money into your escrow account. So that way at the end of the year, you don't have a shortage and you have to pay the money. So make sure that lender, this is an insider tip. So write this one down. If you're getting a mortgage in northern Michigan, make sure your lender isn't escrowing just what the current owner is paying, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. And they escrow the current owner's paying, and then the taxes inevitably go up because that's what happens when somebody buys a house, and then you have a shortage at the end of the year and you have to bring money out of your pocket to pay into your tax escrow account. And that's just not something I want you to do. Another one, this isn't as popular now as it once was, but you can skip the home inspection if the house looks fine. I bought houses without home inspections before, but I've done a pretty thorough viewing of them. Unless you're a builder or have endless money, or there's something that I don't know about, I would always tell you to do a home inspection. It's better. It's not usually going to make your offer any less attractive. And why not just have the ability to spend the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, whatever your home inspection is going to be, and find out exactly what's going on in the house. Because I'll never forget, I had one of the most meticulous sellers ever on Burt Lake about 10 years ago. Meticulous guy. And we did the home inspection, and he found that the attic above his garage was filled with mold. He didn't know it. Nobody knew it. But had they not done that home inspection, nobody would have caught it. He fixed it right away. Probably saved the new buyer $15,000 or so. Another thing you're probably not, if you're not from a rural area, wells and septics are probably a little bit of a boogeyman to you. So make sure those are inspected. Test the water, make sure there's no bacteria. Test the septic, make sure everything functions the way it should. One of the tests they do as part of the home inspection is they turn every faucet on in the house to stress the system to make sure it can hold up. Usually they do. So those are two big aspects, or two systems that you want to make sure are working. Make sure the house has great insulation. Make sure the house, the crawl space isn't wet. There's just a lot of those things that you want to pay attention to versus, risking it. And look, I've sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of houses, and so few times has anything catastrophic come up because of the home inspection. But still, make sure you know what you're buying. These are expensive houses, no matter what you're paying. So you want to make sure that, you're checking the houses as thoroughly as possible. And look, even things like making sure, have a survey done. If it's if you're at the house and it looks like there might be a garage that's encumbering the property line, have a survey done. I'm a huge fan of people knowing exactly what they're getting into when they buy a house. So definitely something also to consider. Another myth is all Northern Michigan houses are seasonal. That is not the case. There are plenty of year-round houses here. If you're buying a house, I'll say this though, if you're buying a house that was once a cottage, make sure you check it out and look at the utility bills. If you're going to live in a house year-round that nobody's lived in the wintertime, you might want to do another layer. I don't want to say another layer of inspection, but maybe have a contractor come out and say, hey, is there adequate insulation? Because you expect a lot. A house being stable in the summer is a lot different than a house being stable in the winter. And you want to make sure that you have the insulation and the systems, and there's not going to be any surprises specifically. I've had people buy these houses on the lakes here that were once cottages, and now they're going to live in them full time. And one time we found out that one of the entire walls wasn't insulated and their pipes froze and it was a mess. This was probably 15 years ago. Definitely don't want that to happen to anybody. So if you're going to buy a house, specifically if it's a house that has never been lived in the winter, make sure it can handle the winter. And that's just good advice to live by. So definitely something to consider. Last but not least, myth is you have to be a millionaire to own lakefront property. Not always. It certainly helps. It definitely helps to be a millionaire if you're going to buy waterfront property in Northern Michigan. But we've seen a lot of people buy houses in Northern Michigan on the water that just saved their money and invested well, or maybe sold a house someplace else. And they were, two school teachers or two, individuals that had professions that you don't think generate a bunch of millionaires or people that can buy waterfront homes in Northern Michigan. And again, there's still a lot of affordable houses up here on the water. If you were a little bit open to not being super particular with what lake you're going to be on, we can find you houses $500,000, $400,000 on the water still. Now it's not going to be, Walloon or Burnt Lake or Mullet Lake or Lake Charlevoix or Torch, but there are lakes up here. And I often say, whether it's Torch Lake or Walloon or Lake Charlevoix or Monroe Lake or Lancaster Lake or some of these lakes that you've never heard of, if you're on the water at all and you can have a boat, it's 80% the same experience, whether you're on Lake Charlevoix or you're on Monroe Lake or Black Lake. It's the other 20% that gets expensive. It's having the nice neighbors. It's having the ability to go all over the place. But I think if you can live in Northern Michigan and have a boat in your backyard and have a lake big enough that you don't get bored driving around and water skiing and swimming with the kids, then it doesn't matter what lake you're on in Northern Michigan. Now, when you start wanting big houses and to have a 50-foot boat in your backyard and stuff like that, you have to spend a little bit more money. But if your goal in life is just to be on the water in Northern Michigan and watch the sunset or sunrise and drive your boat with your kids, your grandkids, or just yourself, we can certainly make that happen for you. So I told you that was the last one, but we do have a couple of bonus ones. So when I got done writing this, I went home, and on my way home, I was thinking about some other ones that I wish I would have included. So these are smaller ones, but these are valuable. So take notes if you're taking notes. You don't need an agent to buy new construction. I definitely think we don't have a ton of new construction here, but I would tell you still need an agent, because that builder is going to represent themselves. If they've got an agent, that agent represents the builder. So typically they will pay a realtor. So if you happen to look for a new construction, make sure you bring your agent with you that can tell you what to look out for. I just had this conversation tonight. I hope they're watching because I told them to. The Zillow's estimate and the actual value, I'm sure there are places in the world where the Zestimate is accurate. Northern Michigan is not one of them. And I keep seeing realtors post this meme that Zillow lost $800 million because they were buying houses using their own Zestimate, and they lost $800 million. And I think there's some truth to that. So happy to provide you with comps whether you're a buyer or seller, but the Zestimate, you got to be careful. I've got a listing right now that's been on the market for a little while that we just reduced the price, that the Zestimate is actually $200,000 higher than we currently have it listed at, and it's not under contract. So, that is an example of the Zestimate not being super dialed in. Cash always beats financing. Look, cash is king most of the time. We've beat plenty of cash offers recently with financing offers. And it's just really about understanding what's important to the seller, what outside of the price. Look, a lot of people selling in Northern Michigan, price is usually the most important, but not always. And oftentimes it's something about being able to stay in the home longer, you waiting for them to find a different house. There's a lot of things that go into a seller's motivation besides just getting top dollar. if it's been on the market for 60 days, there must be something wrong with it. The only thing I would say is the only thing, unless there is something wrong with it, maybe it's just priced too high, and that's the only thing wrong with it. That is something we talk with our sellers about is, hey, don't let your house sit on the market for a long time, because then that idea starts to creep into buyers' heads. And until we can have that conversation, we certainly can't, debunk that. So that's definitely something to consider. So those are some myths I've heard recently that I've written down, and a couple I wanted to add at the end. So I'm gonna hop off here in a minute. If there's anything we didn't talk about tonight that you wanted to talk about, or if you have any questions about what's going on in Northern Michigan, if you have any plans to be in Northern Michigan, I know the off season brings a lot of people here when things slow down, let me know. Next week, we're going to go deep into real estate confessions, wild stories from the North. So I'm super excited about that one. And as always, grab my free location. If you're thinking about relocating to Northern Michigan, grab my free relocation guide, and that'll be in the comments. And as always, I love doing these lives. Reach out to me directly if you need anything, 231-487-6141. Hop on I've got a calendar link if you want to book some time to talk. Love to be your real estate resource of choice if you're thinking about relocating to Northern Michigan. And as always, thank you so much for watching the live, and I will see you next week.